And we're back. Okay, so we covered the basics of what these things are. Again, so basically, the only ones you're really going to see are probably 95 to 99 bikes, most typically in this style. Again, after 97 is when they updated the oiling system. Before that, they were just having the oil be transferred by the timing chain. So the engines weren't quite as reliable back then. Still a pretty reliable engine if you change the oil, but not nearly as so. So what are some of the issues that you can run into if you buy one of these bikes? Say if you buy a bike that looks like my other 501, try not to get one that looks like this. This is actually an FC, and you can see it only has a single air filter on the top of the frame, and it has the smaller flywheel, so the lightweight one. Whereas on the FEs and the FXs, you have a second air filter basically right under the tank right there. You can see this one got a little singy, because that's one of the problems that I'll talk about. As far as engine problems, basically what happens with these is they had some starter issues with the one-way starter clutch. This bike, the reason I have this bike is actually because it had that issue. This bike is super low hour, it's two-owner, and I think it was only ever started with the e-start button. Basically what can happen, and this applies to all of them from this era, because they're all this, like I said, it's all the same engine, just a different displacement. But basically the starter gear sits under there, and then there's a one-way sprag clutch inside the cases that can wear out. The spring can get weak, and it can have some other issues as well. And that's what was happening on this, because of the fact that on the camshaft, you have a little decompression cog. It's like a hammer, and it has a little eccentric sort of that rides open and opens the exhaust valve. And basically what can happen is the spring on that can become unwound or undone, and then you don't have the decompression because that just flops over when you kick it over. So if you try to start one of these bikes on the electric starter without the decompression, and some models came with a handlebar mounted decompressor. The 501 has one, the FE. The FXs didn't, for some odd reason. You can add them too. You can add that at any point. But basically what happens with them is people try to start them and they tear up that gear. To fix that gear or replace it, you have to split the cases, which isn't a huge deal. But it is time consuming. So I had this engine completely broken down, completely split open, and it looked perfect inside, aside from the one-way clutch. The gear was still chewed up, and so was the one-way. So basically what I did with this one was just put a new spring on it, put it back together, and leave the drive gear out. So the starter gear is just sort of idling. It doesn't have any tension on it. Because like I said, they're easy enough to kickstart. And with the e-start bike, you get the benefit of the counterbalancer. So something to consider. As far as parts go for these bikes, a lot of them get parted out on eBay. You can find frames, suspension, wheels, brakes, motor parts, cases, carbs, everything. That's easy. Plastics are a little bit more difficult. Seats are a little bit more difficult, anything like that. But everything is out there. So you can find stuff, and it's really not generally too expensive either, because people are realistic with these bikes. They never sell for that much. And that's one reason. Okay, so some more issues. The fuel petcocks always leak. They're the Acerbis ones. You can replace those easily enough. Typical, especially for bikes that sit. Plastics will be your hardest thing to find, but everything else will pretty much cross over, so including radiators and whatnot. Internally, the engines are pretty strong. They do recommend you replace the cam followers periodically, the little roller bearings that are in there, and then the cam bearings themselves as well. But it's very straightforward. Again, if you're going to get one of these bikes, plan on knowing everything about the engine, because if you don't want to do the work yourself, don't get one of these bikes, because it'll cost you way more than you ever paid for it or ever intended on paying for it if you pay somebody else to do the work. We say with these bikes, the cheapest thing or the least amount of money you're going to spend is the purchase price. And then after that, it just goes up from there. So definitely keep that in mind if you're getting one and you want it to be cheap, that's not really possible. If you get a good running one, you can just change the oil, keep it going, away you go. If you just maintain it and it's been maintained, it'll run forever. But a lot of these bikes, people, it's like, oh, race bike. So they beat the shit out of it. They bounce it off the rev limiter, wear out the connecting rod, big end bearings and stuff like that, and then you have real trouble. As far as internally, the parts you can go, some of them are available, some aren't. It really depends. But generally, you can get the pistons. You can get the rod kits for some models. Some are a little bit more difficult. But with enough hunting, you can find everything. As far as everything else, it's all high quality stuff. Again, these came with Excel rims, Talon hubs, Brembo brakes, Brembo master cylinders, Magura clutches on the hydraulic ones, and then Domino. It looks like Domino clutches and Domino throttles on that. So, the quality, and these are the WPS, I forget, the Extreme. I think they're 5150 forks. And they're pretty good too. I think they used them on some KTMs and people like them. So, and a lot of parts cross over to KTMs too, like the steel Kickstarter from an early KTM, a left-handed kicker apparently bolts on there. The KTM is all over this bike. Everything is KTM. So, should you buy one is the real question. And, if you find one for a good price, cheap enough, I would. I'd buy another one. I mean, well, I've already bought 3 of them. I don't know that I need another one, but these things are really fun. When you ride this bike, it's really great because, this thing only weighs, again, this is a 600, and it only weighs, I think, about 250 pounds. So it's about the same as my KX500, which, for a 4-stroke bike with electric start and lights and all this other crap, that's pretty impressive. And like I said, getting off the 500, which vibrates you to death, and getting on this, you can't even really feel that this bike is running. That's how smooth it is. Power delivery is great. It's a pretty easy starter once you get the carb cleaned up and dialed in. In part 3, I'm going to take some body work off, and we'll go over some more common issues.